The stars outside were completely still. They looked peaceful, but inside every ship of the human fleet, hearts were racing. The crews had been preparing for this mission for months, and now the moment had finally come. The fleet floated silently near the edge of the Epsilon Rift, a dark, swirling region of space that hid everything beyond it. Nobody could see what was waiting on the other side, but they all knew it wasn't friendly. Inside one of the command ships, the atmosphere was heavy. Every light, every sound, every movement seemed sharper than usual. Technicians sat at their stations, hands moving quickly over glowing panels, double-checking systems and sending updates to the bridge. The sound of the engines hummed softly under their feet, steady and reassuring. Even in the face of uncertainty, that familiar vibration reminded them that humanity still had power, that they weren't helpless. The Admiral stood in the middle of the bridge, eyes locked on the main display. It showed the full formation of the fleet, hundreds of ships spread in perfect coordination, each following silent orders. Her face was calm, but her mind was busy. Every choice she made now would decide whether thousands lived or died. She had seen many battles, but this one felt different. This time, humanity wasn't defending. They were taking the fight forward. Around her, the crew worked quietly. Nobody dared to speak louder than necessary. The tension was thick, but so was the discipline. These weren't just soldiers. They were people from Earth, from the colonies, from worlds that had known too much fear. They carried that weight with them. Some had photos taped near their screens, families, children, memories of a home they might never see again. Each picture reminded them what they were fighting for. Through the wide observation window, the rift shimmered faintly, like dark smoke lit from behind by unseen lightning. It didn't look natural, and it wasn't. Long ago, the region had been torn apart by wars between alien empires. What remained now was a dangerous, unpredictable barrier that separated human-controlled space from the enemy's territory. The Admiral turned to her communication officer. "Status report," she said. "All ships are in position," the officer replied. "Warp drives are fully charged. Command is waiting for your order." She nodded slowly. The order to move forward wasn't just another command, and it was a leap into the unknown. But hesitation wasn't an option. Every second they delayed gave the enemy more time to prepare. She looked around at her officers, faces tired, focused, ready. "We've trained for this. We've lost too much already to stand still. Today we move forward," she said firmly. Her voice carried across the bridge, steady and clear. "We go silent. No transmissions, no lights. They won't see us coming." A quiet ripple of agreement moved through the crew. They knew what to do. Down in the lower decks, engineers checked reactor levels while others tightened their harnesses. Pilots ran through their pre-flight sequences, whispering to themselves for luck. The corridors were filled with the sound of footsteps, mechanical clicks, and the faint hiss of pressurized doors. Every person had a role, and everyone knew the importance of getting it right. In one of the smaller fighter bays, a young pilot sat inside her cockpit, helmet resting on her knees. She took a deep breath and looked out through the glass canopy. Outside, other fighters were lined up, glowing under dim red lights. She felt a strange calm settle over her. She wasn't afraid, not anymore. Fear had already taken too much from her life. Now it was time to take something back. Meanwhile, on the command deck, the countdown had begun. "Fleet synchronization confirmed," one officer announced. "Coordinates locked. Prepare for silent warp," the Admiral said quietly. Her words were repeated across hundreds of ships. Lights dimmed even further, and for a few seconds it felt like the universe itself was holding its breath. The fleet was ready to move through the rift, to vanish from this point in space and reappear deep in enemy territory. But before giving the final order, the Admiral allowed herself a moment to think. She remembered the first days of the conflict, when Earth cities were filled with confusion and fear. She remembered the first attacks that caught humanity off guard. People had fled to shelters, wondering if there would be a tomorrow. That memory never left her. It was the reason she stood here now, refusing to let that fear return. She took a deep breath and whispered under her breath, "For everyone we lost." Then she spoke louder, "Engage warp." At that instant, the stars outside seemed to stretch and twist. Every ship in the fleet disappeared into streaks of light, vanishing silently into the darkness. The sudden movement sent a small shudder through the bridge, but no one spoke. The operation had begun. For several seconds there was nothing, only the hum of the engines and the faint flicker of controls. The ships were now moving through a tunnel of distorted space invisible to anyone outside. It was called a silent warp for a reason. No signal, no trace, no sound. To the enemy, it would seem as if the fleet had vanished completely. Inside the ships, though, people could feel it. The strange pull of gravity, the shimmer of colors beyond the windows, the faint tremor in the metal walls. It wasn't painful, but it was unnatural. The young pilot tightened her grip on the control stick and closed her eyes. She could almost feel Earth in her mind, blue, peaceful, far behind her. She imagined her family looking up at the night sky, never knowing what was happening out here. Then, as suddenly as it began, the warp ended. The stars returned, but they weren't the same. The fleet had emerged inside the war zone. Ahead of them was a vast field of glowing dust and drifting wreckage, remnants of old battles. Beyond that, sensors showed faint energy readings. They had arrived exactly where they planned. Warp successful, a voice reported. The Admiral looked at the display. Maintain silent mode, she ordered. No transmissions yet. Her eyes scanned the readings again. The enemy's sensors hadn't reacted. That meant they were still hidden. The plan was working, at least for now. Across the ships, relief mixed with tension. People exhaled, smiled faintly, then went back to their controls. The hardest part was still ahead. This was only the beginning of a larger strike meant to catch the enemy before they could even lift a weapon. The Admiral leaned slightly closer to the display, her face lit by the pale blue light of the holographic map. They won't expect this, she said softly. Behind her, one of the officers glanced at her but said nothing. They all felt the same mixture of fear and excitement. Humanity had spent so long being on the defensive that it felt almost strange to take the initiative. But they had learned. Pain had turned them into survivors, and survival had turned them into warriors. Outside, the ships floated in perfect silence. No signal escaped, no light flickered beyond what was necessary. The fleet looked like shadows gliding through space, invisible to the eyes of their enemies. Inside one of the smaller vessels, a communications technician stared at the monitor showing faint static. His fingers hovered over the controls, ready to send the coded signal that would start the next phase. But the order hadn't come yet. He looked at the fleet appeared in complete silence. One moment there was nothing but the emptiness of space, and the next, hundreds of human ships were there. Engines cold, lights dimmed, weapons offline to hide their energy signatures. They had crossed through the Epsilon Rift, and now they were inside the war zone. The transition was so quiet that for a few seconds, everyone on board felt disoriented. After the warp, the air seemed heavier. Monitors flickered as systems adjusted to the new coordinates. Then, one by one, steady lights returned and people started breathing again. They had made it. On the main command ship, the Admiral stood still, watching the giant screen that showed a wide image of the space around them. The view was haunting, endless blackness dotted with red clouds of cosmic dust. Somewhere far ahead, faint signals flickered like slow heartbeats. That was the enemy zone, warp completed. All ships are accounted for, reported one of the officers. The Admiral nodded but didn't reply immediately. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing mind. Every decision from here on would decide whether this mission succeeded or failed. She turned slightly toward the communication officer and said quietly, "Confirm stealth mode. No transmissions. I don't want even a whisper to escape." "Yes, Admiral. All systems are dark." The silence that followed was heavy, almost unreal. Inside the ships, crews moved slowly and carefully. No one spoke louder than necessary. They all knew that beyond the fog of space, powerful enemy sensors could be listening. One small mistake could reveal their position and ruin everything. In one of the smaller control rooms, a young navigator stared at the radar screen, watching faint blips moving in slow patterns. Those were enemy patrols, mechanical ships scanning the area like floating eyes. They were far away now, but the fleet was moving closer, inch by inch. "Do you think they'll see us?" whispered the technician beside him. The navigator shook his head. "Not if we stay cold and silent." Both of them watched the readings in nervous silence. Every time a blip moved slightly closer, their hearts skipped. But the ships kept steady. Human technology wasn't as advanced as the enemy's, but it had one advantage: unpredictability. They were used to making do with less, to turning simple plans into bold victories. In the command bridge, the Admiral studied the tactical map. A series of blue dots, the human fleet, were slowly approaching a cluster of red signals. That cluster represented the outer defense line of the enemy. If they could destroy it fast enough, the enemy wouldn't have time to send reinforcements. That was the whole purpose of this mission, to strike hard and vanish before the other side could react. The Admiral leaned forward slightly and said, "All ships prepare for maneuver sequence Alpha. No one fires until my command." Her voice was calm but firm, echoing across every vessel through encrypted channels. Crews took their positions. Pilots adjusted their controls. Engineers monitored power levels, and the hum of the ships grew louder as engines warmed up quietly. Inside one of the fighter hangars, a pilot tightened her harness and looked through the transparent canopy. The stars outside looked calm, but she knew the stillness was deceiving. Somewhere out there, hidden in the blackness, were enemy ships. Massive, dangerous, and waiting. But this time, humanity wasn't going to wait. They were here first. She took a breath and whispered softly to herself, "Let's finish this before they even know." A signal light blinked on her console. Stand by for launch. Her hands hovered over the controls, but she didn't move yet. The order hadn't come. Around her, the hangar was filled with similar fighters, each one ready to burst into motion the second the signal came. Back in the command ship, the Admiral gave a slow nod. "Begin advance," she said. The order moved across the fleet like a quiet ripple. Engines flared faintly as the ships began to glide forward. The motion was smooth, graceful, almost like a dance. From a distance, they looked like shadows moving through the void. The closer they got, the thicker the clouds of red dust became. It made the sensors flicker, but that was an advantage. It helped hide their approach. The fleet moved through it silently, every ship maintaining perfect distance and timing. In the observation deck of one vessel, a group of young crew members watched the strange lights outside. Some of them had never been this deep into enemy space before. One of them whispered, "It doesn't feel real, does it? Like we're in someone else's dream." Another replied quietly, "No, it's real. And we're the ones about to wake them up." Everyone smiled a little, though the tension never left their faces. They knew humor was just another way of fighting fear. As they drifted deeper into the war zone, the first signs of the enemy's presence began to appear. A massive structure floated ahead, a communications relay glowing faintly in the dark. It was guarded by a few smaller patrol ships, but they hadn't noticed the human fleet yet. The Admiral studied the readings carefully. This relay was important. It connected the enemy's outer defense with their central command. If it went down first, the rest of their communication would collapse for several minutes. That small window would be enough for the humans to launch the next wave. She raised her head. "Target the relay. Load precision weapons only. We strike once. No second shots." Across the fleet, gunners and targeting crews adjusted their controls. On their screens, the relay appeared as a glowing red circle. They aligned their aim silently, waiting. The countdown started. 10 seconds. The entire fleet was holding its breath. 9, 8. The pilot in the fighter cockpit could feel her heartbeat in her ears. 7, 6. In the engine rooms, technicians watched the power levels climb. 5, 4. On the bridge, the Admiral's eyes narrowed. 3, 2. And then she said quietly, "Fire." For a split second, light burst across the dark space. Streams of glowing energy shot out from the human fleet, silent but blinding. They moved fast, too fast for any defense system to react. The beams hit the relay dead center. The explosion was silent in the vacuum, but inside every ship the shockwave registered on screens. The target was gone. The enemy patrols scattered in confusion, their sensors flaring. But by the time they tried to locate the source, the human fleet had already moved. Engines flared again, and the entire formation slipped sideways into the red clouds, vanishing from radar. Inside the command ship, the Admiral watched the screens calmly. The first phase had succeeded exactly as planned. "All units hold position," she said. "Do not engage unless detected." In the following minutes, the bridge was filled with low voices and quiet data checks. Everyone's pulse was high, but they controlled it. They couldn't celebrate yet. This was just the beginning. Far ahead, the enemy fleet was starting to wake up. Their scanners were lighting up one by one, searching for the unknown attacker. The Admiral knew they would soon realize what had happened, but by then it would be too late. A communications officer turned from his console. "Admiral, they're scrambling ships, but not toward us. They think the attack came from the outer rim." She smiled slightly. "Good. Let them look in the wrong direction." The fleet began to reposition, preparing for the next move. They would hit again, fast, silent, precise. Every part of the mission was designed to confuse and overwhelm before the enemy could even react. Inside the fighter bay, the pilot looked out at the stars again. Her console showed the signal for standby complete. The next command could come at any second. She wasn't afraid anymore. She knew everyone in the fleet was counting on each other. Not on machines, not on luck, but on trust. Somewhere in the quiet corridors of the ship, a few engineers sat together, sharing a short moment of calm. One of them said, "You ever think about what we'll do after this?" Another shrugged. "If there's an after, I might just go back home. Sit near the ocean again." The first engineer smiled. "Yeah, that sounds good." Their small conversation was interrupted by a faint alarm tone, the signal that the next phase was beginning. They stood up immediately, ready to go back to their stations. The Admiral's voice came through the speakers again. "We move in 5 minutes. Stay silent, stay sharp. Remember, they can't fight what they can't see." Every ship crew took their positions once more. The engines glowed softly, almost invisible through the dust. The stars outside seemed to fade, replaced by the red haze of the war zone. The fleet was ready to strike again, and so in the heart of enemy space, the humans waited, calm, patient, invisible. They had come this far without being seen, and when they struck again, it would be too fast for anyone to stop. Somewhere beyond the darkness, the enemy had no idea that the war had already begun, and that the humans were already inside their gates. The silence after the first strike felt strange. Every person aboard the fleet could sense that something had changed. The enemy's communication relay was gone, destroyed in seconds, and now the space around them was eerily quiet. No one cheered, no one spoke loudly. They knew the mission had only just begun. Inside the command ship, the Admiral stood at the main console, her eyes fixed on the sensor readings. The screens showed waves of interference, static, faint signals, and patches of energy spikes. Somewhere beyond that chaos, the enemy was trying to make sense of what had happened. "They still haven't detected us," said one of the officers quietly. The Admiral nodded. "They will soon. We move before that." She walked closer to the holographic map where hundreds of small blue lights represented human ships. Ahead of them, red indicators flickered, the enemy's forward units, scattered but beginning to regroup. The window for surprise was closing, and she knew it. "Signal all units," she said. "Prepare for Phase 2. Across the fleet, the command spread quickly. Inside smaller ships, crew members rushed to their positions. Engineers adjusted power levels, pilots ran last checks, and targeting officers studied their screens carefully. Everyone knew what was about to happen, and everyone knew how risky it was. The plan was to strike deep before the enemy had time to form a defense. They couldn't afford a drawn-out fight. If they hit fast and vanished again, the confusion alone would cripple the enemy's response. It wasn't about destruction, it was about control. In one of the smaller cruisers, a communication technician listened to the low hum of the engines and the faint static in his headset. He'd been through missions before, but never one like this. This one felt final, like everything that had come before was leading to this moment. He glanced at the photo taped near his station, a picture of his family back on Earth smiling under a bright sky. He hadn't seen them in years, but that thought didn't weaken him. It reminded him why he was here. 30 seconds to Phase 2, came the calm voice over the speakers. He straightened, focused, and replied, "Ready." Outside the ship, the fleet began to shift formation. It wasn't a random movement. Every ship had its place, forming a massive, invisible net. The enemy wouldn't see it until it was too late. The Admiral watched the screens as the formation took shape. "Hold position," she said softly. Her tone was calm, almost gentle, but everyone in the room could feel the weight behind her words. The countdown reached 0. "Execute," she ordered. The fleet came alive in perfect synchronization. Streams of light burst silently from their sides as they accelerated forward, cutting through the fog of red dust. Within seconds, the first enemy patrols came into range. The humans didn't fire immediately. They waited for confirmation, tracking every signal carefully. Then, as the enemy ships began to turn toward them, The Admiral gave the command. Engage. The response was immediate. Precision energy bursts shot across the void, clean, controlled, and silent. The enemy patrols disappeared from the screens almost instantly. The human fleet advanced again. Inside the smaller ships, the crews worked with intense focus. The pilots adjusted course with steady hands, their eyes locked on their displays. They moved not like individual ships, but like a single body, coordinated, united, unstoppable. Target neutralized, said one officer. Proceed to next objective, came the reply. The Admiral's eyes remained fixed on the map. Every few seconds, she made small adjustments, repositioning one group of ships, sending another to intercept a signal spike. Her voice never rose, never faltered. Around her, the crew watched her in quiet respect. She was the calm in the middle of chaos. But outside, the war zone was changing fast. The enemy was beginning to respond. Their systems were flickering back to life, and new readings started to appear on the sensors. Dozens of red blips. Moving fast. They're mobilizing, an officer said. The Admiral didn't look away from the map. Let them. They're reacting too slow. Still, she could feel the pressure tightening in her chest. She knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. At some point, the enemy would lock onto them, and when that happened, the fleet would be forced into open combat, something they wanted to avoid. She turned toward her second officer. Send the next squadron forward. We'll break their front before they can form it. The order went out, and a small group of fast ships detached from the main fleet. They streaked forward through the fog, engines burning low and steady. Inside one of them, the pilot's hands gripped the controls tightly. He wasn't thinking about fear anymore. He was thinking about precision, about trust. The success of everyone behind him depended on how well his team performed in the next few minutes. Squadron in position, he reported. The Admiral watched their signals on the map. Wait for my mark, she said. The enemy ships were closing in now, massive triangular silhouettes cutting through the haze. Their formation wasn't tight. They were still disorganized from the earlier confusion. That gave the humans an opening. Now, the Admiral said. The forward squadron unleashed a wave of bright pulses that darted through the enemy line. On the screen, several red signals blinked out. The rest scattered, breaking formation. Direct hit, reported the tactical officer. The Admiral exhaled slowly. Good. Keep pressure on their left flank. Don't chase and make them turn. The fleet adjusted again. The human formation bent slightly, creating an arc that surrounded the enemy ships from both sides. It was a risky move. One mistake could expose them. But the Admiral trusted her crews completely. Inside the control rooms, the atmosphere was focused and electric. People spoke in quick, short sentences. Data flashed across screens. The air was filled with a soft vibration as the engines worked at full coordination. In the fighter bay, the pilot sat ready, her craft still waiting for deployment. The red standby light blinked slowly in front of her. She could hear faint radio chatter through her earpiece. Calm voices, controlled breathing, nothing that hinted at fear. She knew what that meant. Everyone was doing their job. Then the light in front of her turned green. Launch sequence approved, the voice said. Her heart jumped, but she smiled slightly. Copy that. The bay doors opened, revealing the black void outside. For a moment, she just stared at it. The stars, the dust, the quiet beauty of space. Then she pushed forward. The fighter slipped out into the darkness, engines flaring briefly before going dim again. She joined the formation above the main fleet, her craft gliding smoothly into place. Below her, the larger ships looked like glowing islands in an endless sea. Maintain silent flight, came the order. The fighters began to spread out, forming a protective layer. Their purpose wasn't to attack yet. It was to shield the main fleet and detect anything approaching. Inside the command ship, the Admiral continued to monitor the situation. The enemy was clearly disoriented. Their main formation had scattered and their command signals were weak. She knew it wouldn't last forever. Sooner or later they would regroup, and that was when things would get dangerous. But she wasn't planning to give them that chance. Prepare next volley, she ordered quietly. We finish this section before they can recover. Her officers moved fast. Every screen on the bridge lit up with data. The energy readings climbed and the countdown began again. In that moment, the Admiral looked around at her crew, people she had trained, trusted, and fought beside for years. Some looked exhausted, others nervous, but every single one of them was ready. She felt a deep sense of pride. No matter what happened next, humanity had come further than anyone thought possible. 3, 2, 1, the voice called out. Fire! The second wave struck like a silent thunderstorm. Bright streaks crossed the dark horizon, connecting one side of the war zone to the other. For a few seconds, the entire region seemed to glow, not with destruction but with determination. It was the light of a species that refused to be forgotten. Then the light faded. The space went quiet again. The fleet moved forward, steady and unbroken. Inside the bridge, the Admiral stood still, her reflection faintly visible against the glass window overlooking the stars. She could see the faint trails of light left behind by their weapons, reminders of how far they had come. "We did it," someone whispered behind her. She didn't turn around. "Not yet," she said softly. "They'll be back. But for now, we've given them something to remember." The bridge fell silent again. Outside, the human fleet continued through the fog, leaving behind a space filled with fading echoes of light. Every person aboard those ships knew this was only one part of a much larger fight. But for the first time in a long time, they weren't running. They were leading. And somewhere beyond the edge of the sensors, the enemy finally began to realize the humans were no longer defending their borders. They were inside the war zone, moving fast, and they were just getting started. The first waves of light had faded from space, leaving behind only quiet. The fleet slowed its pace, drifting among clouds of red dust and faint energy ripples. It looked peaceful from a distance, almost calm, but everyone inside those ships knew it was the calm before the storm. The humans had struck fast and hard. The enemy had been caught off guard. But now the silence meant something else. A warning. The enemy would not stay confused for long. Inside the command ship, the air felt heavy. The bridge was dimly lit, screens flickering with new data. The crew moved quickly, checking readings and adjusting systems. The Admiral stood in the center, staring at the holographic display that filled the room. Red signals were appearing across the map again, one after another. "They're regrouping," said one of the officers quietly. The Admiral didn't move her eyes from the screen. "I know." More signals appeared, moving in tight formation. The enemy wasn't running anymore. They were organizing. Fast. And their numbers were growing by the second. "They're bringing in reinforcements from the other sectors," another officer said. The Admiral's jaw tightened slightly. "How long before they reach our position?" "At this speed, maybe 10 minutes. She nodded. 10 minutes wasn't much time, but it was enough, if they used it wisely. "Send word to all ships," she said. "Form defensive rings. Keep our weak side vessels inside the perimeter, and tell engineering to prepare for emergency power rerouting." The bridge came alive. Voices overlapped as officers relayed orders. Lights blinked across the tactical screens as the fleet adjusted formation. Slowly, hundreds of ships began to move, reshaping into protective layers. Larger cruisers on the outside, smaller crafts in the center. It looked like a shield of light forming in the dark. Deep in the engineering decks, the sound of machinery filled the air. Teams worked fast, hands covered in grease and heat-resistant gloves. Sparks flashed as panels were opened and cables were rerouted. One engineer looked up at the glowing pipes above him and said quietly, "We can handle this." His teammate nodded but didn't speak. Everyone was too focused. In another section of the ship, the medical team was preparing too, not for panic but for readiness. They set up stations, checked supplies, and made sure every stretcher was locked in place. They hoped they wouldn't need them, but hope wasn't enough out here. Preparation was what kept people alive. Back on the command deck, the Admiral turned to her sensor officer. "Where are our forward units?" "Still positioned near the outer rim of the rift," the officer replied. "They're tracking the enemy's approach." "Tell them to fall back," she said. "They've done their part. I want them alive." As the message went out, the Admiral took a slow breath. The fleet was ready, but she could feel a tightness in her chest. Every battle, no matter how well-planned, came down to trust. Trust in people, trust in training, and trust in the belief that humanity could endure. Outside the ship, the stars seemed to shift. Distant flashes of light began to appear across the horizon. The enemy was coming. In one of the smaller defense ships, A young pilot sat quietly in her cockpit. The control panels glowed faintly around her. Through the glass, she could see the outlines of larger human vessels moving into position. She took a deep breath and checked her systems again. Her squadron was on standby, ready to intercept anything that broke through the main line. Her comms crackled softly. "Stay sharp," came the voice of her squad leader. "They'll come fast once they're close." She replied calmly, "Understood." Her voice didn't shake. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was ready. The radar pinged once, then again. Bright dots appeared, moving quickly. The enemy was close now, too close to ignore. On the main command ship, the admiral watched their movement carefully. "Here they come," someone whispered. She raised her hand slightly, eyes narrowing. "Hold formation. Don't fire until they're within range." The tension inside the bridge was unbearable. Every light blinked in rhythm with the crew's heartbeat. Seconds stretched into long, quiet moments. Then suddenly, the first readings hit the sensors. Massive energy waves sweeping across space. "They're scanning us," an officer said. "They'll see us any second," another replied. The admiral's voice cut through the room. "Then we move before they react." Her hand came down sharply. "Execute delta shift." Instantly, the fleet sprang into motion. Engines roared to life, glowing trails cutting through the red haze. The formation split into 3 moving groups, curving outward like wings. The maneuver was fast and precise, every ship moving as if guided by instinct. The enemy fleet, still trying to locate them, was caught in surprise again. Their signals flickered wildly as they tried to adjust their scanners. For a few precious moments, confusion spread through their ranks. Inside one of the smaller human ships, alarms beeped softly as power levels spiked. "They've locked onto us," a crew member said. "Maintain position," the captain replied. "They'll be looking at the wrong target soon." And just as he said it, the admiral's next order echoed through every ship. "Deploy decoy beacons." From multiple points across the fleet, small pods launched into space, scattering in different directions. Each one emitted a false energy signature identical to that of a large ship. To the enemy, it suddenly looked like there were hundreds more human vessels than there really were. The radar screens on the enemy's side would now be a mess of false readings, red dots multiplying everywhere. On the human ships, everyone watched in silence as the trick worked. The enemy's formation began to spread out, chasing the wrong signals. "They're taking the bait," said one of the officers on the command bridge. The admiral gave a small nod. "Good, keep them guessing." But then something unexpected happened. From the edge of the radar, a new wave of signals appeared, larger than before, moving fast. The enemy wasn't just regrouping. They were bringing in their heavy units. "They've launched their main carriers," said the sensor officer. The admiral's expression didn't change, but her mind raced. Heavy carriers meant serious firepower, but they were also slower. And if they were destroyed, the rest of the enemy fleet would lose coordination. "This is our chance," she said quietly. "We take out their carriers before they can deploy." She looked to her tactical officer. "Tell the front lines to focus fire. Everyone else shields them." The order spread instantly. Across the fleet, lights brightened as ships powered up for the next strike. The atmosphere was tense but focused. No panic, no chaos, only determination. In the fighter bay, the pilot received her command. "You're clear to launch," the voice said. She smiled faintly. "On it." Her fighter shot out from the hangar, joining dozens of others that streamed into open space. They formed a perfect pattern around the main fleet, engines glowing like small stars. As the two sides closed distance, the admiral's voice echoed across the comms one last time. "Remember, stay with your team. Protect each other. This isn't about who flies the fastest. It's about who stands together." Her words reached every corner of the fleet, steady and reassuring. The first shockwaves rippled through the space between them, not from explosions, but from the force of engines and countermeasures. The massive enemy carriers glowed like distant suns, pushing forward. The human fleet curved around them, ready to strike from both sides. "Lock targets," the admiral said softly. Lights flickered across the bridge. The ship's crew waited, their fingers hovering over controls. 3, 2. And then her voice was calm but firm. Now. The fleet fired in perfect unity. Streams of focused light shot across the void, hitting the carriers with precision. The enemy's outer armor flared, scattering sparks of energy through the dust clouds. But before they could respond, the TOW human ships had already changed position, moving behind cover again. On the smaller ships, the crew erupted in quiet cheers. They had done it. They had struck first again. The Admiral allowed herself a single breath of relief. But deep down, she knew this wasn't over. The enemy would adapt. They always did. For now, though, humanity had done the impossible again. They had entered the war zone, faced a stronger force, and still stayed one step ahead. As the fleet regrouped, silence returned. The stars around them shimmered faintly, reflecting off the metallic surfaces of their ships. The Admiral looked out through the wide glass of the bridge, her reflection mixing with the view of the endless universe. She spoke softly, more to herself than anyone else. They thought we would hide forever. They thought we would break. But we're still here. Around her, the crew worked quietly, repairing systems and recalibrating scanners. Each one knew that this was only one chapter of a long battle. But hope had returned, a quiet, powerful kind of hope that spread through every corridor and cabin. Far away, beyond the rift's red haze, the enemy ships flickered like distant shadows. They were regrouping again, but it didn't matter. Humanity had already proven something greater than power. Unity. And as the fleet prepared for whatever came next, one truth echoed through every heart on board. They were no longer survivors. They were the storm that no one saw coming. The smoke of battle was slowly fading from the edge of the rift. What had been chaos just minutes ago now looked like drifting dust and glowing debris. The human fleet floated silently in formation, engines running low to save power. The glow of their lights reflected off the metallic ruins that surrounded them, the remains of the first great clash in this new war. Inside the command ship, the air was thick with exhaustion. The crew members were still at their posts, eyes fixed on their screens, hands moving carefully across control panels. No one was celebrating. Everyone knew this wasn't the end. It was just the first step in a much bigger fight. The Admiral stood quietly in front of the large holographic map. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the blue light. The fleet had survived, and that was the good part. But what came next would be even harder. "Status report," she said, her voice calm but slightly tired. One of the officers looked up from his console. 73% of the fleet is operational. We've lost communication with 5 ships, but rescue teams are searching. She nodded slowly. And the others? Minimal damage. Some power systems are unstable, but engineers are already working on them. Good, she said. Keep all ships in tight formation until repairs are done. We can't afford to be scattered now. The room went quiet again. The Admiral's eyes stayed on the map. Small blue dots, her ships, floated in a circle surrounded by gray areas representing the destroyed enemy carriers. But beyond that, faint red signals still flickered. The enemy wasn't gone. They were watching, waiting. Far away, on one of the smaller ships near the outer line, a group of engineers worked in silence. The floor trembled slightly with each adjustment to the power core. Sweat ran down their faces as they tightened bolts and reconnected cables. One of them finally leaned back, letting out a shaky breath. "We almost burned out the core during the last surge," he said quietly. Another engineer wiped her hands and replied, "Yeah, but it held. That's what matters," he gave a small nod. "Still, feels like the next time might push us past the limit." She looked at him, her face tired but firm. "Then we make sure there isn't a next time. At least not without being ready." Her words hung in the air. Everyone went back to work, faster this time. Back on the command ship, messages began to come in from across the fleet. Short reports, small stories, a damaged ship that managed to stabilize, a pilot rescued from a drifting pod, a team that had kept the shields up until the very end. Every one of those messages carried a piece of hope. The Admiral listened to each one carefully. She never smiled much, but now a faint light touched her eyes. Humanity had taken heavy blows before, but something about this moment was different. For the first time, they had pushed back and won a real fight, together. A few hours later, the fleet began moving again. Slowly, they turned deeper into the rift. The stars outside looked distorted as if space itself was watching them. Strange energy readings flashed on the sensors, silent storms that danced between invisible fields. This was dangerous territory, but it was also where the enemy had built their main base. The Admiral knew that if they stopped now, everything they'd achieved would mean nothing. The element of surprise was still on their side. She walked across the bridge, speaking to her officers. "We can't turn back. The enemy will be rebuilding. If we give them time, they'll return stronger. We keep moving." No one argued. Every face in the room showed the same quiet determination. Outside, the fleet's engines lit up again, pushing them forward into the unknown. As they entered deeper into the rift, communication signals grew weaker. The energy around them was interfering with long-range transmissions. Ships had to rely on short bursts of radio, old-fashioned and risky. The silence between messages was long and heavy. Inside one of the escort ships, a young crew member stared at the flickering monitor. "I don't like this place," he muttered. His captain looked over and said softly, "No one does. But fear keeps us awake. Stay alert." The crew member nodded, adjusting the controls. His hands were steady, but his heart wasn't. Every sound, every flicker of light outside the window made him tense. The rift wasn't just dark. It felt alive, whispering through the metal walls. Hours passed like that. The fleet moved in perfect order, staying close, watching every reading carefully. Then suddenly one of the forward ships sent an urgent signal. Unidentified objects detected ahead. "They're not moving, but they're large." The Admiral leaned closer to the holographic map. The new signals appeared as faint gray shapes scattered in front of them. Too many to be asteroids, too structured to be natural. She gave the order instantly. "Slow down. Scan everything. No one fires until we know what we're looking at." The ships adjusted speed, their engines dimming to a low hum. After a few tense moments, the scans came in. The objects were huge, metallic, silent, and covered in strange marks. But there was no movement. No power signatures. "They look like ships," one of the officers said. "Old ones." The Admiral frowned. "Whose?" The officer hesitated. "Human, or at least—" "They used to be." The room fell silent. Everyone stared at the readings in disbelief. The wrecks floating ahead were human, relics from the first contact war decades ago. The ones everyone thought had been destroyed completely. The Admiral took a deep breath. "Send a small team to investigate. Record everything." Minutes later, a small shuttle detached from the fleet and drifted toward the wrecks. Inside, the team floated in zero gravity, their helmets reflecting the ghostly light of the rift. As they got closer, the outlines of the old ships became clearer. Hulls cracked open, markings faded, but still showing the old human insignia. One of the explorers whispered over the radio. "It's like they were frozen in time." They scanned the wrecks carefully, taking data and images. There were no signs of life, no power left in the engines. But the strange thing was how they were positioned, all facing one direction as if they'd been trying to escape something. Back on the command ship, the Admiral listened to the report. "Recover whatever you can. These ships might tell us what really happened here." Hours passed as the team worked. When they returned, they brought with them damaged black boxes and fragments of old data cores. Engineers immediately got to work decoding them. By the time the first recording played on the bridge, everyone had gathered around. The screen flickered, showing static, then the image of a frightened officer from decades ago. His voice cracked through the old recording. "If anyone finds this, the rift isn't just an energy field. It's alive. It listens. Every time we tried to leave, it changed. It learned our patterns. We thought it was just enemy interference, but it wasn't. It was something else." The message ended abruptly. No one spoke for a long time. The air felt colder now. The rift wasn't just dangerous because of the enemy. It was something far stranger. Finally, the Admiral broke the silence. "Whatever this thing is, we can't let fear control us. We came this far for a reason. If there's truth in what he said, then we find it, and we survive it." Her words carried strength even through the unease. The fleet adjusted course again, deeper into the unknown. This time, every ship moved slower, scanning not only for enemies but for the rift itself, as if it were a living presence that could be watching. Hours turned into days. The crew barely slept. The farther they went, the more the space around them changed. Colors shifting, stars bending, strange waves pulsing through the dark. It was beautiful in a haunting way. One pilot described it best in her daily log. It's like flying inside a dream. You can't tell what's real and what's reflection, but somehow it feels like the rift knows we're here. Then, without warning, one of the rear ships reported something strange. A signal repeating on old human frequencies, faint and broken. The Admiral turned sharply toward the comms officer. "Can you trace it?" He shook his head. "It's bouncing. The source keeps changing." But before they could analyze further, the signal suddenly cleared for a few seconds. A distorted voice came through. "You're not alone. It's still here." Then silence. Everyone froze. The Admiral's face remained calm, but her eyes darkened slightly. She turned toward her officers. "That voice, did we confirm it's from one of our ships?" "Not yet," came the reply. "But it matches the old fleet's transmission pattern, the one we just recovered." That meant it was impossible. Those ships had been destroyed decades ago. For a long moment, no one spoke. The sound of the ship's systems filled the room like quiet breathing. Finally, the Admiral said softly, "Mark that location. We're going to find out what's out there." The crew exchanged uncertain looks, but no one argued. The fleet changed direction once more, moving toward the coordinates where the strange signal had come from. Out in the rift, the lights of the human ships looked like tiny sparks against an endless void. Behind them, the wrecks of old vessels floated silently as if watching. Ahead of them, the rift pulsed faintly, almost like a heartbeat. No one could say for sure what waited for them deeper inside, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just a war between fleets anymore. It was something far beyond human understanding, and as the fleet pressed forward, the Admiral whispered to herself words no one else could hear. "If it's alive, then we'll teach it that we are too." The deeper the fleet moved into the rift, the stranger space became. The stars that once guided them now looked distorted, like reflections on rippling water. Time felt slower, sounds seemed to echo longer, and even light bent differently. It was beautiful, but in a haunting way, like something watching from behind the silence. Every person aboard those ships could feel it. The engineers stopped joking during long shifts. Pilots spoke only in short, calm words. Even the Admiral, who had faced countless battles, felt something heavy pressing against her thoughts. The signal they had received earlier, the voice that said, "You're not alone," still played in their minds. It wasn't just fear. It was curiosity mixed with unease. What if it wasn't a trap? What if someone or something was really trying to reach them? Inside the command ship, the atmosphere was tense but steady. The Admiral stood in front of the main screen, staring at the strange pulse that shimmered in the distance. It looked like a swirl of blue and gold light beating like a slow heart. "Distance?" she asked quietly. 5,000 kilometers and closing," replied one of the officers. "Energy reading? Unknown. Not mechanical, it's organic almost." The Admiral frowned. "Organic?" The officer nodded. "It's giving off rhythmic patterns like breathing, but the frequency isn't matching anything we know." The room fell silent. Everyone was thinking the same thing. Maybe the old message had been right. Maybe the rift really was alive. She turned to her communications officer. "Any response from the signal?" "None, ma'am. It went completely silent." The Admiral's eyes didn't leave the glowing horizon. "Then we keep moving." The fleet advanced carefully. The closer they got, the stronger the strange energy waves became. The ship's metal hulls vibrated softly, and static filled the radio lines. On one of the smaller vessels, a young navigator gripped her console tightly. "The readings keep shifting," she whispered. "It's like the rift is reacting to us." Her captain glanced at her. "Then we keep it guessing." Across the fleet, the human ships spread out into a wide formation. Their lights glowed against the endless dark, small but defiant. Then, just as they crossed another invisible line, everything stopped. Engines, screens, communications, all of it went dark in an instant. Inside every ship, the only sound left was the quiet breathing of the crew. Emergency lights flickered on, painting the rooms in pale red. "Systems offline," someone shouted from the engineering deck. "Switch to backup power," came the reply. But even backup systems were struggling. The energy around them was too strong, as if something was draining their strength. The Admiral gripped the edge of the control table. "Report." "All ships disabled," her officer said. Something's overriding our power sources. Can we restart them? Not yet. For the first time, silence filled the bridge, a silence heavy with realization. They were trapped. Then, through the dark glass of the viewport, a light appeared. It started small, just a faint shimmer in the distance. But soon it grew brighter, expanding into a swirling shape, a sphere of light and shadow that pulsed softly like it was alive. Everyone stared at it in awe. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't a machine. It was something else, something vast, ancient, and intelligent. The Admiral took a step closer to the glass. "So this is what they found," she murmured. A low hum began to fill the air, not from the engines but from the rift itself. It wasn't sound exactly, more like a vibration that reached into the chest and mind at the same time. Some crew members clutched their heads. Others stared forward wide-eyed. "It's communicating," one of the science officers said, his voice trembling. Not with words, but with energy. The Admiral stayed still. "Can we interpret it?" "We're trying. It's strange. It doesn't sound hostile, but it's trying to understand us." For a long moment, no one moved. The Admiral closed her eyes briefly, then said, "Open the external communication array. Let's see if it listens back." The officer hesitated. "You want to talk to it?" She nodded. "We came here to face whatever this is. If it's alive, it deserves to hear our voice." They opened the channel. Static filled the room for a moment, then silence again. The Admiral spoke slowly, her voice calm but strong. "This is the human fleet. We mean no harm. We came through the rift searching for truth and for peace. We've fought to survive, but we don't seek destruction." For a while, nothing happened. Then the light outside shifted. The glowing sphere pulsed faster, sending waves of color through the rift. The vibrations deepened, almost like a reply. The science officer's eyes widened. "It's responding. It's trying to match your voice patterns." The Admiral continued speaking. "We don't understand what you are. But if this space belongs to you, we respect it. All we ask is passage and knowledge. Tell us what happened here." Another pulse of light swept through the fleet. Systems flickered for a brief second. Lights came back on just for a moment before dimming again. "It's giving us power," one technician said softly. On the screen, the patterns of light began to change. They formed shapes, images, projected into the air around them. The crew watched in silent awe as the story unfolded. The rift wasn't a weapon. It was a living field, a massive ancient being that had once protected this part of the galaxy. But when the first human explorers arrived decades ago, they had accidentally triggered its defense instinct. It didn't hate them. It was just confused, reacting to signals it didn't understand. That misunderstanding had caused the old fleet's destruction, not because of war, but because of fear from both sides. As the images faded, the Admiral stood completely still. The room was silent again, except for the faint hum of returning systems. One of the officers whispered, "It was never our enemy." The Admiral nodded slowly. "No, we just never listened." She took a deep breath and turned toward the screen again. The sphere of light still floated there, calm now, almost gentle. "Transmit one last message," she said softly. "Tell it we understand." The officer complied. A quiet signal pulsed through the void. For a moment, everything seemed to hold its breath. Then the sphere shimmered one last time and began to fade. The colors dissolved into the stars, and slowly the power across the fleet returned. Lights blinked back on. Engines hummed softly to life. The screens filled with normal readings again. The rift itself began to calm, the chaotic waves settling into stillness. One of the younger crew members whispered, "Did it just let us go?" The Admiral looked out at the endless dark ahead. "No," she said quietly. "It trusted us to leave." The fleet moved forward once again, engines glowing faintly. Behind them, the rift's colors dimmed, like a great curtain closing after a long story. Inside the ships, people began to smile again for the first time in days. There were no cheers, no loud celebration, just quiet relief, the kind that came from surviving something extraordinary. Hours later, when the command ship finally emerged from the far side of the rift, the stars looked brighter than before. The fleet had made it out. The communication systems buzzed to life, reconnecting them to the wider colonies of humanity. Messages poured in, cheers, disbelief, joy. But the Admiral stood apart from the noise, watching the calm expanse of space ahead. A voice behind her said, "We've made it, ma'am. The fleet's intact. We can finally go home." She turned slowly, her expression thoughtful. "Yes," she said quietly. "But home won't be the same anymore." The officer looked confused. "What do you mean?" She smiled faintly. "We left searching for victory. We found understanding instead. That changes everything." He nodded slowly, realizing what she meant. Humanity had just made contact, not with an enemy, but with something beyond their comprehension. And in doing so, they had proven something important. They could survive without destroying what they didn't understand. As the fleet sailed quietly through open space, the Admiral looked at the distant glow of the rift one last time. It shimmered faintly as if watching them leave. "Goodbye," she whispered softly. "Thank you for trusting us." The stars stretched ahead, infinite and full of promise, and so the human fleet continued its journey, not as conquerors, not as victims, but as explorers who had learned that strength wasn't always about power. Sometimes it was about listening. Somewhere deep in the quiet of space, the rift pulsed once more, gentle and calm, as if answering back. And for the first time in a long, long while, the universe felt peaceful,